As summer draws to an end, now is the time to do more and save more at Biltmore. Be among the first to experience the Leonardo da Vinci 500 Years of Genius exhibit. Save with online ticket discounts and overnight stay packages that include admission to the exhibit and admission to Biltmore House. Plan your visit and save now at Biltmore.com.
Welcome to the direct-to-video connoisseur. Matt here again, and today I have a very special guest with me. I've got Mitch from the Video Vacuum joining us. Mitch, how are you today?
I'm great, Matt. How are you?
I'm good. Now, you've been on before. I think you did a show back when Jamie and I did the show back, I guess, in 2014 before I went on the big hiatus. And so I think we talked about a movie, right, with Michael Parks that involved, like, cannibals or something.
Oh, yeah. We Are What We Are.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So unfortunately, that's one of the ones. TalkShoe had this big server meltdown, and they lost all of the episodes pre-January 2015. So I'm in the process of getting those ones up again. So I think that one is one of the ones that, I think I've got like 13 left to put back up. So hopefully that won't be up soon. But yes, I think that was, the last time I think that we chatted on the podcast.
Yeah, it's been a while, but I'm glad to be back. Glad you're back.
Yes, I know. It wasn't an intended hiatus. It was one of those things where it's like, okay, I'm going to get back into it. I'll get back into it. And then it was like when I lost the domain, that was a big thing. When I let the domain lapse because I didn't update my credit card information. So the debit card that I was using to pay for the domain, it expired. Got the new debit card, of course, was using that, but didn't update it in the domain company that I was using. And once it lapsed, some company grabbed it and just was like, okay, we're going to do what we can with Matt Movie Guy. And I was like, I got to go change all the links and stuff. And that kind of got me. Then PhotoBucket was trying to extort its users for money for the hot linked images. And I was like, man, it kind of like defeated me. And then I was like, once PhotoBucket kind of relented on their thing, I was like, okay, I'm going to get back into it. Maybe, get the domain back or go back to direct, DTV kind of sort of Blogspot and kind of go back, get started from there kind of, So we're kind of in the process of getting things back up and running for sure.
Well, I'm glad you're back.
Now, Mitch, if you could, tell people kind of. I know the last time when we talked, you'd had a book coming out about your reviews, but if you wanted to just tell people about the Video Vacuum and what you do there.
Yeah, well, the Video Vacuum started back in about 2005 when I was a manager at a video store, and people would always come in and they would ask me, well, what movie would you rent, or what movie is good? And not that I got tired of saying the same movies all the time. I just made a handy little fanzine of the stuff that was coming out and the stuff that they should rent, and it kind of grew from there. And then, after about 7 or 8 issues of that, this is going into about like 2007. I just started a blog, and it took off for a little while. I mean, I was getting boxes of screeners and free movies, and all was great. So I just kind of parlayed that into self-publishing a few books. I started with just compilations of reviews, and then from there, now my latest book, The Big Book of Horror, that's totally 100% brand new, and I have a local artist and a friend of mine, Pete Muller, who he does all my artwork for me, and he does a really cool job of it's almost like the Fillmore East, kind of the 60s, 70s kind of psychedelic looks to them. And he always gives, each, he puts his stamp on each of the covers. So the last one I did, The Big Book of Horror, it kind of covers a little bit of everything because I watch a little bit of everything. Everything from the 40s movies to the new stuff, to slashers, to remakes, to and that's the thing. I watch a little bit of everything, and I have fun. On my website it says exploring the weird wild world of cinema, and right now like I'm on an El Santo kick. I've been watching a lot of El Santo movies.
Those are awesome.
So. Oh yeah, and half the time they don't have subtitles, and I would be kind of disappointed if they did because then it would make sense. Right. But yeah, so oh,
Mitch, can you hear me? Oh, I think we lost the connection there for a second.
I mean,
nope. Can you hear me now? Looks like we're cut out for a second there. Double check to make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're kind of coming in and out there for a bit.
All right, can you hear me now?
Oh, I can hear you now. Yep, perfect.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of raining out, so I don't know if it's a bad connection or what. But I can go back to how far you want me to go back.
So one thing, because I know with the blog, I remember I think Ryan Kenner, who did Movies in the Attic, I think he first introduced me to the video vacuum. I think he had found you. I remember he first messaged me on MySpace back around 2007, around that time. And he had like Daniel Bernhardt for his MySpace avatar. I can't remember, maybe it was like Bloodsport 2 or something like that. And I was like, man, this guy seems cool. And he just is so like about reviews and just like movies and stuff like that. And he was like, oh, you got to check out the video vacuum. And so that was when I went and checked you out. And like you said, like you cover everything. Like you're and I think at that time it was like LiveJournal, so it was really you just did the reviews. That was it. There was nothing fancy about it, and just like right to the point, which I loved. I loved that you could kind of just go through a whole bunch of different types of movies in one sitting with your reviews. And I think that idea of the book is really cool too, because I think people do tend to get too hung up in one type of horror. I like the idea that you being someone who watches a lot of different types of movies to kind of take that knowledge that you have and put it to use like that is really cool.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Kenner. I haven't heard from him for a while, but he would send me movies and say like I think he just wanted to hear what my take was on it. And I have other frequent readers that send me stuff all the time, and I honestly haven't bought a video from or a DVD from a brick and mortar store because I have people sending me movies all the time. So but I always try to put my spin on anything, and it seems like nowadays, I mean, from when I first started, it seems like there's like a new generation out there now that doesn't want to say anything bad about a movie. And I don't really understand that. Like there's this whole brouhaha on Twitter. I'm sure you see where they say, oh, you shouldn't put your 10 worst movies of the year up. I'm like, well, maybe I peruse 10 worst movies because I'm having a bad movie night and I'm cherry picking all the best ones. Yeah. So have you seen that too?
Yeah, it's interesting because yes, we get the idea that reviews are subjective, and I think it's good to be subjective. I could read your reviews and not agree with what you said about a movie, but it could still be one of your 10 worst of the year. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think you're right. I mean, part of it is, I don't know if you ran into this too, when you start talking to people who make the movies, when you're starting to talk to maybe Albert Pion or somebody like that who's telling you what went wrong when it came to making the movie. Sometimes, maybe you feel a little more sympathetic on how a movie went bad, but the movie still went bad. I mean, it's like, even though, they passed the script off, to 5 or 6 people in an attempt to try to save it, it still didn't work after the 5th rewrite. And so, yeah, it's interesting. I think that's the idea, right? Is that what what you're saying? Like, that the idea that, like, reviews are subjective, so I shouldn't be telling you what the worst movies are of the year or something like that? Or is it like more like we need to be more nice to everybody?
Well, yeah, it almost seems like they're saying, well, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. My motto has always been, like, if you're not going to say something nice, at least say it in an entertaining way where it's all in fun. And a lot of times, if I'm attacking a movie, the worst thing a movie can do is be boring.
Right.
And if it's silly and very low budget, I mean, I can put up with a lot because I watch a lot. But at the same time, I'm a fan of Mystery Science Theater, and that they're making fun of the movies, yes, but there's also a celebration of that because they themselves are having really lo-fi puppets and scenery and backdrops and stuff. So, I mean, that's kind of where, not exactly where I'm coming from, but it's kind of in that style where, I could just list what's wrong with the movie, or we could, have a conversation about it and point out, okay, this is cheesy, but, and also another thing that I used to do was treat bad movies like they were cinema, and treat cinema movies like they were bad movies, and review them kind of in a lowbrow manner, while kind of taking the lesser Z-grade movies and kind of probably finding elements in there that the filmmakers never intended. But again, it's all in fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like to have fun like that too. I mean, like, you watch like a Bruno Mattei movie that he's just kind of trying to get a movie out there, but it's also fun to watch a Bruno Mattei movie, like in amongst the Reb Brown screaming and the rip-offs of things like Terminator and stuff. You're also seeing like a guy who, like, it seems like maybe he came from the same school as like a Fellini or somebody like that, and it's kind of fun to see his shots where you're like, man, that looks like a shot I would have seen in the Fellini movie, and here it is with Reb Brown getting ready to kick somebody off a cliff or something and scream at him. And I always find that to be fun. But yeah, I agree with you there too. It's, I think especially when you think of like bad movies from like, or low budget movies, I should say, from like the earlier periods, these were guys that, or these were people that came from a school of filmmaking. I think one of the things nowadays, it seems like, and I don't know if you've noticed this too, especially when you watch like direct-to-video stuff, it seems like the mentality is, let's just shoot it all, right? Let's get the whole thing shot, and then we'll fix it in post. So we don't care if we've got a director that's like a traditional director, or if it's like a stunt coordinator that's just going to, film the shots, and the cinematographer is just going to get everything in there. And if we need to shrink it, we can shrink it. If we need, millisecond edits, we can do it that way. And I think there was something fun about like old horror and things like that are done in by directors. I mean, even Ed Wood was a director in a sense that, even though, there's so many things you can make fun of in his movies, he was a director. He was trying to make something of art of some sort that you can, there's something there that you can, I don't know, identify with, I feel like.
And he put his stamp on it. I mean, you watch 3 Ed Wood movies, they're Ed Wood movies. And they stick out in your mind because it's a very personal film to him, even though that there's pie tins being held up by strings. He means it, and that's what he had to work with. Yeah. So I applaud guys like Ed Wood, and it's funny because I laugh jokingly. I'm not joking, but it sounds like I'm joking. But I say like Ed Wood is an auteur. Mm-hmm. Because everything that's in his brain is up on screen.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way with like Jim Wynorski.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you see 5 Busty Cops movies, only one man could make 5 Busty Cops movies, and that's Jim Wynorski. So, I mean, I applaud a lot of directors for just putting their there, I don't know if I could call them fetishes, but probably
Right.
because Ed Wood had and gore in every one of his movies. But yeah, there's something to be said for someone who does that instead of tries to just grind something out to grind something out.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point when you think of Jim, when you mention Jim Wynorski, because my wife and I, we tend to have fun watching like those Hallmark Christmas movies this time of year, and Fred Olen Ray has been directing some of those, which makes sense when you think about it, right? Some guy, a guy who can work on a budget, get things done quickly, and bang it out, and bang out a bunch of them. I mean, he was doing that for so long that, of course, he would be perfect for these. And it's interesting, my wife would bring up things like, boy, that there was the movie took place near an orphanage, or it had an orphanage in it, and she's like, boy, that little boy, he looks like he's from the 50s, and you could just imagine that's Fred Olen Ray putting his little touch in the movie to have the boy, in the movie that was made in the 2015s, or 2015 or something, 20-teens. A boy who looks like Dennis the Menace, that he would make him look like that, when it looks completely out of place, but that's his mind of like what an orphan should look like in a Christmas movie. It's kind of cool to see that when you're thinking like, okay, Hallmark Channel holiday movie, assembly line style. Let's just kick them out, get as many as we can, get as many actors who are out of work and looking for something, as many chiseled featured Canadian actors that we can to be the male heartthrobs. To see a Fred Olen Ray get in there and do something that kind of just gives you a little something else that you can latch onto in a movie like that. I always appreciate that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, Fred is, he's a guy that's been in the trenches for, decades. And he started out with horror movies, direct-to-video movies, because that's where they needed product. And he made product, but when he would make product, he would make something like Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, which will always be an immortal classic. And then, moving more into his Skinamax movies, he would grind out 4 or 5 in a year, and because Cinemax needed product. Now Hallmark needs product, and it's just fascinating to me that where there's a need, there's Fred Olen Ray.
Yes, yeah, and he is. He could. It is. It was like made perfect sense to think about that. That like, yeah, of course, with a Hallmark movie, who would why wouldn't you get a Fred Olen Ray to do that? Yeah, and you do kind of think about it when you see like the female characters in it, and you're thinking like, man, if this is a Fred Olen Ray picture, these women would be naked by now, or something like that. Some of the old Fred Olen Rays, or they would have a knife stuck in their head by now, or something like that. And so it's kind of funny to see the transition, but he's just a professional filmmaker. He can do it however you need to do it, and I think that's one thing that is lost a little bit now in the modern DTV, where it's like, okay, we've got a set location in Louisiana or Michigan or something like that. We've got Bruce Willis for a couple days. We've got 50 Cent, or Curtis Jackson, however, he's credited in the movie. And okay, and you watch that and you don't say like, oh, I know this director. It's almost like one of those things where maybe you watch like 3 or 4 of those and go, oh, I didn't even realize that the same director did those too. But it was a different director who did this one or something like that. And it's like, I think there's something about these, those kinds of ones that I like. I agree with you there. You can appreciate that almost in a way that you could appreciate a Scorsese or somebody like that. That like they're a director, trying to do something with the medium as a director, as opposed to somebody who's just being there to just get the film on screen and then figure out what they can do with it to package it and get it on Redbox as soon as possible.
Yeah, with so many DTV movies nowadays, it seems like if they have 4 big names in the movie, those 4 big names will never be in the same scene at the same time. Right. And it's like you can almost see the scheduling department juggling everybody's schedules, say, okay, we have to shoot Bruce at this angle today because tomorrow David Bautista's going to come in and he's going to shoot his half of the scene, and we'll just CGI them together and make it look like. And for guys like I'm not really knocking Bruce Willis. I just bring him up because that's who I see nowadays, it seems like. But you can't blame Bruce Willis for going down to Georgia or whatever and getting a paycheck and probably doing 4 scripts in 4 weeks, not even knowing what movie he's in. and just getting back on the plane and then going back and doing whatever. And he's been criticized, I think, a lot for sleepwalking through his roles. And I don't personally see that. I think there's there's only one John McClane.
Right.
And I don't think you go into these newer Bruce Willis movies expecting that, you're not going to find it. But if you're expecting a serviceable DTV movie, that's what you're getting. And occasionally you might get something more.
Yeah, and I think too, with Bruce Willis, he's only going to he can only work with what he's got as well. So, if the script has been passed over 5 or 6 times, which, I think that's always a telltale sign too. I think people, they immediately want to blame the director or blame the actor. But, if you go into IMDb and you see 5 writing credits, okay, something went wrong there. When, this was probably an initial idea that somebody liked, but then thought, okay, well, it can't just be that. Let's do this with it. Let's change it. When I think of a movie that was successful like that, you think of like RoboCop, where they had 2 main writers that really worked on it, and then Paul Verhoeven, made changes here and there. But for the most part, it was just their idea, and they kind of played off each other. Whereas when you think of it like, okay, the script is sold to the company, and then they take the script and they move it on to somebody else. I know. One of the directors I talked to, he did a movie recently where it was like he got it like on the 4th rewrite as a director, and he was like, him and his buddy just went in and like did the best like triage job they could on it, and then when once it all was said and done, they kind of did the best they could, and then they had me he had me review it way back 5 or 6 years ago, and there were a couple of scenes I was like, boy, I really like this one scene. He's like, oh, that was actually the original one that I did. It's like one of those kind of deals. But I think that's sometimes what a lot of these directors get. Fred and I are probably the same thing. Like, okay, here's this Hallmark movie idea that we've changed 5 or 6 different times to be able to get it to work. And instead of, can you do something with it? And he's like, done, I've got it, and there it is, and now it's on the Hallmark schedule, and this actress or actor who we haven't heard from in a decade is suddenly featured on the marquee, and we're like, boy, look at what they look like now. We haven't seen them in forever, and I think that's kind of the thing. Whereas I think sometimes with the DTV ones, they don't have the ability to make Bruce look good like that. Maybe if it's not a real director who's directing, if it's a stunt coordinator who's just and maybe they don't even have a really good cinematographer either. If they if it depends on how the movie's made, who's there for talent. If it's just the actor and they're spending all their money on the actor, and then they're just like, maybe the director walks off and they're like, okay, let's get this stunt coordinator to maybe film the rest of it or something. Bruce Willis, there's only so much he can do as an actor to save that kind of thing. But what we see when we watch it is, oh, it's Bruce Willis, sleepwalking through it, and we don't know, everything else that went into it. But that kind of gets back to your point about saying people saying you can't say a movie's bad anymore. I think we could still say it's bad if it turns out wrong. It's just maybe we don't know exactly what happened to cause it to turn out wrong. But the result is still the same, right? If it's serviceable, if we think, okay, Bruce turned in a fun performance here, we can say that. And if it didn't work, we can say, well, maybe they didn't use Bruce well, or maybe it didn't work out. Maybe Bruce was sleepwalking. I've seen De Niro sleepwalk through a few, and I almost kind of feel like he has that right. He's done enough really great roles that maybe he could afford a couple sleepwalks. But it's an interesting thing when we think about like. When we get the end product, when we're reviewing it, I think we have the right to say what we want about it. And if the director says, oh, this is why it turned out this way, and I certainly didn't want it to be that way, sure, we get that. And maybe I guess like a Fred Olen Ray or something like that, we could say, sure, I got what I know him enough to know like what that this may have been a mistake. And I know I kind of trashed one of his movies once that he made, The Assassination of Jesse James, because I thought it was like almost like he was apologize, or he was like kind of lauding the South in the Civil War, almost like making it seem like it was a shame that the Civil War, that the South lost the Civil War with the whole slavery thing. I thought that was kind of really bad. But now I think about it, maybe Fred Olen Ray, maybe that one got away from him. Maybe he didn't mean for it to sound like that, and he's got so many other ones that maybe you can give him the benefit of the doubt. But by the same token, if it's a bad movie, it's a bad movie, and we, if I think it's a bad movie, I have a right to say that too.
Well, and getting back to his Christmas movies, I'm still waiting for him to to somehow get his old crew of people back for these movies, like somehow find some old footage of John Carradine and put him in and CGI him as Santa Claus or something. To use some of his old school aesthetic instead of, just, they're going to run out of titles for Christmas movies. They make one every day.
Yeah, and it's like you can only there's only so many bed and breakfasts in Vermont that a rich city girl can return back to after her city slicker boyfriend dumps her, and she needs to go back and couple with the romantic high school sweetheart played by
Patrick
insert
Duffy or whoever. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So yeah, you can only do that so many times, and yeah, I think with Fred Olen Ray, he's somebody that like he's gonna find ways to, I don't know, say do something different with it, but he's definitely gonna find ways to take a script that's been cobbled together to make it not seem as much like that when it really is, and just make it as good as possible in as quick a time as possible and under budget and all of that.
Yeah, and there's like you said, there's a quirkiness about his films. You're watching one as opposed to just another run-of-the-mill Hallmark movie.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to kind of like being an auteur, being somebody that can put a little bit of themselves into that movie, and especially when the market is flooded, like the Hallmark market or the direct-to-video horror market in the 80s and the Skinamax market. You're watching a Fred Olen Ray movie, and a lot of times that's good enough for me. I'll take one of his worst over a lot of those guys' best.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think when you see that name on when you're looking at a movie and you look it up on IMDb, or if it's listed there as him as a director, I think him, Wynorski, those are names that when I see that name there, or if I'm looking, you going for the Cirio H. Santiago, somebody like that as well. It's like when I see that name, I know, okay, I'm going to get something good there. I'll
go to hell and back for Cirio H. Santiago. I mean, he has made some of the. He invented topless kickboxing, so he has a place in the Hall of Fame all to his own.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I always loved him. And actually, Will, who does the Exploding Helicopter site and podcast, he said that Cirio Santiago, I guess, has the second most movies with exploding helicopters in them after Antonio Margheriti. So he has that as well. So we've got topless kickboxing and exploding helicopters.
Yeah, it's funny because he did Silk 2 and Caged Heat 2. He does a lot of sequels, and when you watch the sequel compared to the original, again, you're watching a Cirio H. Santiago movie. Yeah. There is just like this sleazy fun about it. When you watch Caged Heat 1, it's a good movie. It's a good women in prison movie. When you watch Caged Heat 2, you crank out the beer and the pizza, and you just go to town on it because it's fun.
Yeah, and I think of his post-apocalyptic ones where you just Richard Norton or David Carradine running around with a car with spikes attached to the front of it.
Oh yes.
You can't get enough, or some of those Philippine Vietnam films that he did as well. Because I know he did some as well as like Bruno Mattei. Those movies, yeah, like you said, like when you see, and I think of other ones too, like he did like Live by the Fist with Jerry Trimble. I think that was Cirio H. Santiago as well. They're just like you said, and what you're gonna get, and it's sure, he's trying to make a movie under budget. He's trying to make a movie quick. He's trying to put it together, but there's something about these directors that they have that ability to do that, and make it something that we can enjoy.
And then he has guys like Vic Diaz that come on, and when you see Vic Diaz, you just applaud because you're getting some gold. Yeah. And I think Vic Diaz is one of the most underrated exploitation stars of all time.
Yeah, that's a good point. You mentioned Vic Diaz because he's been in a lot of those, and it's like one of those things where it's like, like you might see his name on the title at the beginning, But if you don't, it's kind of one of those things like almost like, okay, when am I going to see him in this this movie this year? And then it's like almost like you kind of point him out, like that's look at there's Vic Diaz, that's and then, like if I'm doing the review for the blog, I try to get that picture of him or something like that.
It's definitely the Where's Waldo moment.
Right. Yeah. So now the topic that we had today, we're talking about like DTV comic books, but actually this might be a really good segue into that. Talking about comic book movies in general, but the DTV ones. One of the things I think that was really fascinating. I don't know how you feel about this, but in the late 80s, early 90s when we had some of these. I mean, I know Punisher was one that wasn't meant to be DTV. I think it was supposed to be in the theater, and whatever happened, it just ended up on the shelf for too long. But Captain America is one that I remember seeing ads for that in like comic book newspaper type things, like not like Wizard, but like kind of similar idea where they would talk about conventions and stuff. And I'd see ads for that screening in places like California, and I'd think, is this real life? Like is this really Captain America? That I never knew came out. It was essentially direct to video. What are your thoughts on that era where we had those direct to video comic book movies?
Well, it's funny because you have the dichotomy of Marvel versus DC. Mm-hmm. And when you look at what DC was doing at that time, they have guys like Richard Donner, mm-hmm. Tim Burton. They have big name stars like Marlon Brando.
Yeah.
And they have Jack Nicholson. And Marvel has J.D. Salinger's son and Albert Pine. So it's like, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, but it's funny because I know Marvel was in financial trouble at the time. So they sold the movie rights to Canon for some quick cash. But didn't they know that Canon made Superman 4? Maybe they should watch Superman 4 to see what they were going to get.
Right, because that's what's kind of funny from DC's standpoint was that Superman 4 pretty much killed the Superman movie franchise at that time. And then Batman comes along, Tim Burton does Batman. And it's almost like DC didn't really see what was the writing on the wall for them in terms of comic book movies. They were just like, okay, well, Superman's done. Let's just go to Batman. I don't think they saw Joel Schumacher coming in and making that franchise, but it ended up being, commercially. I kind of had fun with those, especially Part 4 with George Clooney. I thought was a fun movie, but not to the kind of blockbuster level that the Tim Burton ones were.
Well, I mean, Batman and Robin, gets hated on. I think we've seen the pendulum swinging back to where people can appreciate it for its campiness.
Yeah.
Because Schumacher came from the era of the TV show, and he was just doing what he knew, which they've already established that Batman can be campy. You might not want him to be campy, right, but he can be. So I never saw that he violated any rules. And I mean, if you given the choice between Forever and Robin, I will watch Batman and Robin because it knows what it is. It's not trying to ape Tim Burton. Yeah. I think that's where Schumacher had like one foot in the grave a little bit. He tried to honor what Burton did while still doing his thing and didn't really do either thing. But whereas he kind of had his own license with Batman and Robin. Of course, he ran into the ground, but he made the movie he set out to make, and you can't fault him for that.
Yeah, and I liked George Clooney as a Batman. I thought he was really cool. I mean, we think about the goofier parts, like the bat nipples on the suit and those kinds of things that, like they kept showing Alicia Silverstone's butt when they were showing her costume. It was like, it's funny you mentioned the 60s one because that was how I got into comic books was actually, the 60s Batman really falls right in line with my dad's sense of humor. So I remember growing up, they would show the old Batman in reruns, and that, like Sunday mornings, I think it would be on, and I would watch that with him, and that was really how I got my first, and I remember 10 years old, I guess 9 or 10, whatever age I was when Batman, the Tim Burton Batman came out. I remember going to the movie theater so excited and just being like completely aghast. Like it took me a long time to really understand what was happening there with that Batman because I was just expecting more, Adam West dancing around and, Cesar Romero, Jack Nicholson essentially doing Cesar Romero's Joker. So I was completely freaked out by that. But that was sort of my introduction into what comic books. And then, of course, the Hulk was a different one, the old Hulk TV show where it was more like that was like a kind of a serious introspective TV show. But
yeah, I mean, it was more like The Fugitive meets Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I think that was a very budgetary way to do that. And I think when you think about the other Marvel movies of the 80s and 90s, like trying to do Fantastic Four on a Roger Corman budget just will not work, no matter how you try. And I mean, if you watch Doomed, you see like the actors and the actresses, and they were jazzed to be in the Fantastic Four, and then they get to the set and they're like, "What the hell is this?"
Yeah,
but they were still enthusiastic about it, and I think that enthusiasm carries over on the screen, but that it just didn't have a prayer.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up Doom because that was one that I saw that recently. That's kind of what inspired me to want to do an episode about comic book movies, partly the DTV ones, but also even sort of where it came from there. But one of the things that really struck me about the beginning of Doomed is how they're interviewing Lloyd Kaufman, and the idea that they went to Lloyd Kaufman first with this project of making a low budget Fantastic Four movie, and he was like, I don't see anything in it for me. And it's very Lloyd Kaufman, right? That Lloyd Kaufman's idea is, I don't want to use somebody else's characters. I've got, we're going to make our own comic book characters. We're going to make our own Toxic Avenger, Sergeant Kabuki Man. There's no point in us making Marvel's movie for them or whoever, wanted them to make it. Whereas Roger Corman's idea is like, sure, yeah, let's give it a try. I'll make it work. And so, it's interesting that, because we always kind of almost think of those two together. Like Lloyd Kaufman, as kind of a schlock producer, and then Lloyd Kaufman and Corman as well. I mean, I think of Corman in particular, Carnosaur, the Blood Fist movies. And I that was a really interesting beginning there, the way that, it seemed very Lloyd Kaufman. I think only Lloyd Kaufman would say, no, I don't want to do a Marvel movie, when it could maybe be like a huge financial windfall for his production company. He could see right away that it wouldn't be and not do it. Whereas Corman's like, no, I'm going to figure out a way to make this work.
Well, and also too, I think Kaufman is very aware of the Troma brand, and it's like oil and water. Like you said, they have Toxic Avenger, and he squashes people's heads and sticks their faces in the deep fryer. I mean, you can't have the thing do that.
Right.
So, but I think Corman, unless it was one of, there was some shady stuff going on between them and Marvel.
Yeah.
And whether intentional or not, I mean, filming the interdimensional space travel, and you can't do that on the same sets that you made Not of This Earth on, and it's just not going to work.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and yeah, and you think of like I talked to Albert Pion had talked about when he made Captain America. He said that he was actually tasked with doing Spider-Man. I guess Canon had the rights to Spider-Man as well, and he just discovered you couldn't do it on the budget like that. That it, part of it was it wasn't going to look good with harnesses and all of that. That was one part of it. He said it wasn't going to look good, but I think he said it was going to be dangerous. Like he probably the person doing it might have died making it. So they were going to do it. They had plans in place to do it, and it just didn't seem feasible. So they scrapped it, and they the only one we ever got was Captain America. So it's interesting too that Roger Corman was like, we're gonna figure out a way to make this work. Whereas even Canon was like, we can't do Spider-Man the way we on the budget that we're gonna try to do it on.
Well, and I think what's interesting is you need a budget for a Spider-Man. You need a budget for Captain America. But you hit this sweet spot when you try to do Punisher, because all you need is a guy in a black leather jacket, a motorcycle, a gun, and a couple of mobsters that need to be eviscerated. So I think that's why the Punisher works so well. It's because it like the Incredible Hulk show, it's a very budgetary minded enterprise of like, how can we get the most bang for our buck. And I think, I mean, the Yakuza shootout at the end, I mean, that's as good as anything as the bigger budget Punisher movies they would later go on to make.
Yeah, I mean, I like the TV show that they did on Netflix with Jon Bernthal, but one of the things I don't like about those is that they get carried away with these big plots that are just kind of all over the place. And also, Jon Bernthal as the Punisher is kind of a goofball. I know Ty from Come Up With the Ruse is always joking about how he's like making these noises where he's like roar and stuff like that when he goes in to shoot people. But Dolph Lundgren's Punisher, I think it when I think of like what I wanted the Punisher to be, I think it worked. I think I mean, again, it was one of those things where I didn't know it was supposed to be in the theater, and then it didn't work out. It was one of those things where I see it on the shelves at the video store, and I'm like, is this real? Is this actually the Punisher? Like, this isn't like some kind of a whatever they call those mockumentaries or something like that with the Asylum when they would make like kind of like that was kind of the same thing as it was with Captain America, but with the Punisher, it was like, wow, this is really good. And I mean, I don't know if I say really good, but I mean, it was enjoyable. It was like, I think compared to like the Thomas Jane one that was so successful, or I don't know if that one was successful, but it was in the theater. It was a big budget thing. I think Marvel is probably trying to get rid of all of those at this point because they want it to be the TV show with Jon Bernthal. Maybe I don't know if they want to spin that off in the movies or something, but I have a feeling they seem to be trying to consolidate and get rid of these. So I don't know if maybe even like the Thomas Jane one and the Ray Stevenson one will go the way of the Dolph Lundgren one where they're harder to get. But that Dolph Lundgren one, I don't think there's something about that one that just really worked really well. I think you're right. It's you can do it on a budget. You get Louis Gossett Jr. in there. He was a good co-star for Dolph in there. The Yakuza is not a difficult villain to make. We saw they worked really well with Dolph in Showdown in Little Tokyo. I mean that's really kind of what the Punisher is it's Showdown in Little Tokyo only as the Punisher, as the character without Brandon Lee, unfortunately. But
there's like a scene. There's a scene in the movie where, he's like, what do you call 125 dead bodies in 12 months or whatever? And he's like, a work in progress.
Right, yeah.
He's like, that's the Punisher. In so many words, you've nailed the character in one line of dialogue. And that's something that you don't get in any of the other Marvel movies at the time. Yeah. An understanding of the character and putting that character on screen. And you could argue that New World, who made the Punisher, was even a smaller, company than Canon at the time.
Yeah.
Because they were mostly doing horror movies like House and the Angel movies. They were very much an exploitation company, and you need a little bit of exploitation edge for the Punisher, not so much for Captain America. And I can't, when you think canon, you think Death Wish 3, you think, and I don't think canon was ever the right home for the Marvel properties.
Yeah, at least not if you're not going to do them with an edge, like you talked about. I think that's one of the interesting things about the Punishers. I think, Marvel with these Netflix shows that they did, I think they felt like they could add an edge to them. I really like the Luke Cage one, and I did like the Punisher one as well. But yeah, there's something about, like the Punisher as a character. He was a completely new concept when they brought him in the 70s, because the idea was that he's a good guy, and he's a good guy in a way, I think, with that 70s, New York, where it was kind of the same thing with the Death Wish was, came from the original one with Bronson. It's that idea that, there's so much lawlessness around, and you need someone who's going to step up and be as bad as the criminals to take them down. That it's not all about just being a good guy all the time, but sometimes you got to be dirty and do what needs to be done. And I think that's why that character resonates so much. And I think when you watch a good Punisher, that's what you want to see. It's not just about him just like shooting people, but shooting, like you said, like mobsters, organized crime figures that are really kind of the most evil, whether they're doing things like human trafficking or, killing innocent people, those kinds of things. It's real easy to be like, yeah, I want to see the Punisher just go in there with a machine gun and take all these people out. And so I think that's, I was thinking about this in terms of direct-to-video movies now for comic book movies, and I think obviously the tube's out of the toothpaste with these movies where they're I mean if Avengers can make billions of dollars and essentially outsell Gone with the Wind even adjusted for inflation, then obviously everybody's going to try to make those kinds of movies. But I think with the kind of the modern DTV we were talking about with like Bruce Willis doing movies and big name actors doing those. I mean, the Punisher is something that I think you could do these sort of like episodic direct-to-video kinds of movies with him, almost like they did with Warzone. I think that was kind of like close to direct-to-video. I think it maybe like 10 million in the theater. But if you think of somebody who would be good in direct-to-video now, I almost think the Punisher would be the one.
Yeah, I mean, I think every screen iteration of the Punisher has kind of nailed some sort of characterization of the Punisher through his comic book run. I know the 2004 Thomas Jane one really went towards the Welcome Home or Welcome Back Frank storyline, and I think Lexi Alexander really nailed that Tim Bradstreet cover art of the Garth Ennis run. Like, I mean, if you look at Ray Stevenson, he looks like a Tim Bradstreet picture.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it like that. It had like that day glow kind of backdrop. It had like, just like this kind of like almost like neon green slime, like in the sewer when it had that poppy kind of feel to it. And I think that's kind of what's missing from the TV shows.
Yeah.
I think, I think they are a little bit episodic, and I can't knock John Bernthal because he's basically doing his best in those. I'm not. I mean, I think they're fine for what they are, but I would rather see maybe a 2-hour movie with him instead of these plots that kind of just go on for like a season, and then you're like, okay, let's wrap this up because and I think there's a feeling too with Marvel, they have to use like him and Daredevil like kind of like to get their foot in the door with television. I think that they took these properties that have been used before that everybody knows, we'll put them on Netflix, and then now that they're going to have Scarlet Witch and the Falcon and all these other TV shows now, I don't see where the place for them is now.
Yeah.
Because if you're not going to connect them to the big screen version, I mean, but then again, it's content, and that's what all movies and shows are now. The higher ups look at it as content. They say, well, how many people will watch a show with this? Yeah. Okay, we'll put it on Hulu or something.
Yeah, well, that's one thing I'm thinking about too, because I think they pulled the Punisher from Netflix and they want to put it on Disney Plus. And I know Disney Plus is supposed to cover a whole gamut of all of Disney's properties and the ones they've bought from Fox and all of that. So I'm not, obviously there is a room for R-rated material in Disney Plus, but I just feel like the way that they're advertising Disney Plus, it seems to be more not family friendly, but a little bit more PG-13. And I almost feel like the Punisher could die in Disney Plus. I feel like Netflix has more of that kind of edgier stuff on it that would, that it has, I mean, I think of like movies like Avengement and some of the dirtier, grittier action movies that are on Netflix and some of the grittier horror movies that something like the Punisher would fit better there. But I agree with you. I think with the John Bernthal thing, because when I think of that second season of the Punisher, in particular, where you had that prophet character who was it had been in the comic books before. They kind of as they always do, they always bastardize it, right? They always make it like kind of like the comic book, but not quite. I don't think Marvel is as bad about. I should say Marvel, but the Disney Marvel products. I don't think they're as bad about it as like the Fox ones. They seem to just be like. They can never seem to get it right. It seems like a lot of times where the way they butcher things a lot. But it feels like like that Ray Stevenson one. I agree with you there. When I think that era of the Punisher, kind of the bigger, kind of imposing presence on the top of on the cover of the comic book, with kind of a bigger head, kind of more grizzled. That one really stands out for me as really nailing that Punisher. And John Bernthal, I think, could do that kind of work. I mean, think of how badass he was in The Walking Dead. He could bring that to the Punisher and do it well. And I think you're right. Like if they did a movie where it was, the Billy Russo Jigsaw character and then this prophet character in a 2-hour film where they're just kind of kicking each other's asses, and you kind of remove a little bit of that story that we didn't really need all there. I mean, there was a lot of story there and a lot of twists and turns that we don't really need. That could have been something that was really amazing. The problem is, of course, right, is that when we think of comic book properties nowadays, they've got to pull a certain amount of money. They can't be, they can't go into the theater and have a limited theatrical run and then make their money in DTV later. I think of the Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance. I just saw that the other day. I looked that up. That movie made like $150 million worldwide in the box office. We consider that to be almost like a bust now with a comic book movie. The studios consider, not we, the studios consider that to be a bust for a comic book movie now. It's got to be pulling in, more than at least a $500 million to make its money back.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think there's just so the histories are so rich.
Yeah.
Of all the characters, and of course there's always that one writer who wants to get that one property because he had I think of Sam Raimi. Mm-hmm. Sam Raimi got the job for Spider-Man because he said, look, I had Spider-Man posters on my wall when I was a kid. They gave it to him because they're okay, this guy knows what he's doing. Mm-hmm. But then there's a lot of the screenwriters out there and a lot of the filmmakers, it's a job to them, and they just, like we were saying, they just grind it out. Yeah. And I think you need to have some people behind the scenes that have some sort of reverence for the character, like Richard Donner with Superman. I think that translates through the screen, and I think with the Russos have glimpses of that throughout their films as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned a good thing there too when you talk about sort of getting the property, getting the thing there. One thing I think about with Fox when they talked about Doomed and how Fox was negotiating to get the Fantastic Four, and that was kind of the idea, was that maybe that I should have probably mentioned ahead of time when we were going to talk about comic book movies, so there's probably going to be a lot of spoilers when we talk about these movies. But in the Doom one, they talk about that perhaps the Roger Corman Fantastic Four was being used as a ploy to get Fox to pony up money to buy the property. And I think one of the biggest mistakes was whoever negotiated to get the Fantastic Four with Doctor Doom, Silver Surfer, and Galactus. Whoever did that and didn't pick up Thanos at the same time, that person should have been fired, because that, I think, is a big reason why Fox ended up eventually getting bought out by Disney. But why their comic book properties didn't do as well as the ones that Disney had. I mean, Thanos was like one of the big, for the early 90s, he was one of the biggest villains. Like, he was one of the best baddies. And I can't imagine that Marvel wouldn't have sold Thanos along with the rest of them. And the idea that you could have maybe made the Fantastic Four as the initial one against Doctor Doom, second one have Silver Surfer, and then start teasing Thanos in the second one, and then bring him on for some big, huge third movie, that would have probably done it for Fox. And I think that's part of it, is that I think a lot of these people initially early on didn't really know about these characters, and I think maybe that's what Disney did, or I guess were they always Disney properties in 2009, like when they started the Iron Man ones, or did Disney end up buying them after that?
Well, I believe Disney bought Marvel Comics.
That's right.
In the early, I 21st century somewhere. But like I said, they sold the rights to Captain America and and Spider-Man to canon, basically to keep the lights on.
Right.
And they had sold, eventually, Spider-Man went to Columbia and Sony, and the Fantastic Four, Daredevil, X-Men went to Fox.
Yeah.
So they have, they've made these deals all around town, and then they get bought by Disney. Well, Disney's got stock in it. They have all those characters except whoever, everybody else has. And I mean, it's interesting because I think for the most part, I mean, there's some ups and downs in the series, but the X-Men movies are really great in that they almost need to be in their own self-contained universe. Because if you also have Wolverine, Cyclops, Storm sharing the same universe with Spider-Man, Iron Man, Thanos, it takes away what it means to be a mutant. Because the mutants are the outsiders. And if you're say, oh, well, these guys also have superpower too, it kind of diminishes that. So I actually like having the X-Men in their own self-contained universe.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that. I think it's a good point too. I mean, one of the things I think of, one of my qualms with what Fox has done with some of the X-Men things is that they haven't done enough kind of the way that Disney did with the Marvel ones, where, like, for example, it seems like Deadpool, he can't seem to – it's like he can't hang out with the rest of the X-Men. He can only hang out with, I guess, Colossus. And then it's almost like he's his own product, even though he's an X product. And I also don't get why he couldn't be a Weapon X like he was in the comic book canon, like why they had to make some weird construct where he's a mutation because he was tortured to turn into a mutant, which, that's never been part of it. I've always thought that the great part about mutants is that they're born as mutants. And so that's where the whole idea of the metaphor was, right? That it was a metaphor for racism and bigotry to have the mutants there. And this idea that you can become a mutant if you're tortured enough was a weird concept. And it was a better idea that they tried to save Deadpool's life by giving him, Wolverine's healing power. And then it just, causes him to mutate and look gross and all of that. And I those are things I can never quite understand why they can't quite do it exactly the way that the comic book did it, because Rob Liefeld, I don't think he called that part of it. I think when he created the character, I don't know if he brought him that far in advance, but when you think of Cable and Deadpool, those were like those kind of electrified Marvel in the early 90s there. And Rob Liefeld said he invented them because he was trying to make his own Spider-Man and Wolverine, because, Marvel was so protective of their characters that, you couldn't just have Spider-Man in every, in your comic all the time. If you did, or Wolverine, you had to get permission to use them in your books. So he just made his own, which I always liked that idea of that. But I would have liked to have seen Fox do, with Deadpool, again, bring him in with the Weapon X thing, with Wolverine, have him be a part of the Wolverine thing. I guess maybe they're afraid because they don't want to have the stink of what they did with Deadpool the first time in the X-Men's Origin Wolverine, where they just completely butchered Deadpool and everybody was just like, this is horrible. How could you do this to Deadpool? But
then again, you have him turning into Scott Adkins at the end, which is an okay trade-off for me because I'm a big Scott Adkins fan, so that worked for me.
Yeah, I mean, I love Scott Adkins, and I think, Scott Adkins is a guy that I think people are trying to push for him to be the next Batman, but, he's someone that I think if you're Fox, and I guess at this point, I don't know, how does it work now? Now that Fox has been bought out by Disney, does that mean they have all the X products now too, or were those not part of the buyout?
Yeah, they have everything that Fox had, so they have all the X-Men, and I believe last I heard they were courting Denzel Washington to be Magneto. So
wow,
I don't know how that will play out, but it's certainly an interesting time to be a Marvel fan because it seems like anything's on the table now.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd like to see. I mean, when I think of Fox, with their, cause I agree with you about the X-Men movies. I really liked them, but I feel like they made a lot of missteps. Like, when you think of how successful Black Panther was. They could have made a Storm standalone picture, however many years before that would have been just as big, if not more. And they didn't capitalize on having a character like Storm, who, in the very first X-Men movie, she kind of like there's that scene where the senator guy there turns to water and she runs out of the room screaming. And I always looked at that as like, Storm is a character that they could have done more with, and probably capitalized on that better, and I don't know, it would have been a kind of movie where people would have been, okay, Fox is doing something new here. They're creating new types of superheroes and making movies centered around new characters that even though they're established characters, they're ones that are bringing in new audiences and telling people that it doesn't have to just be Cyclops as the hero or Professor X or something like that. And I feel like they dropped the ball on a lot of those things. And, again, talking about not bringing in Thanos, and then they tried to reboot the Fantastic Four. So it seems like they had those missteps. It's going to be interesting to see now that Disney's taken over, like what they're going to do with these products. Like Deadpool was one that I think they had some good ideas. It seemed like they were going to maybe move that in a good direction. It's interesting. I mean, I don't know too. The way that the Avengers movies ended recently with the Endgame and Infinity War, it sounds like almost like there's some actors that maybe have had enough of doing Marvel movies and they're kind of moving them on, and now maybe the thinking is to bring in some of these X characters instead.
Well, it's kind of interesting too, because you got to think about the growing pains of the genre as itself. Because, I mean, like you said with the Fantastic Four, why didn't they bring in Thanos? Or Spider-Man 3, why did they rush to get Venom in there? Or X-Men 3, why did they rush the whole Dark Phoenix saga? Yeah. It's a trial and error thing. They want to appease the fans, but then they half-ass something and the fans aren't happy. And then now with all these characters, well, you can cherry pick little bits of information throughout the series if you're watching it, and then you can culminate with a big Avengers movie where all the storylines kind of get wrapped up. And to a certain extent, they did the same things with the comics when they would have the crossover events with, you got to buy all 7 issues to read the whole story, because it goes through Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, all Spectacular Spider-Man. So I think it's kind of interesting now that they've gotten those growing pains out of their system. That I mean, really, that like we were saying, like now it's television. Now they can put those breadcrumbs or whatever in a TV show and save that for, people that really want that information. Okay, well, it's in the TV show. We don't have time for it in the big screen movies.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good point, because you think of like the early 2000s when they were first starting to make those. I mean, the Daredevil one, right? Which is fascinating, because they did the Daredevil one, then they did the Elektra sequel to it, which neither of those worked. And so they thought, okay, yeah, let's make the TV show version of it. The thing that kind of I still marvel at, for lack of a better word, is that when 2009 comes around and they make the Iron Man movie and it's so successful. I mean, when I was growing up, Iron Man was one of those books that was bringing Marvel down. Nobody really read Iron Man. There weren't great villains in it. I mean, Fin Fang Foom, the Mandarin, like people didn't really like that. They liked seeing Iron Man in the Avengers perhaps, but that as a book on its own, it didn't really work. Thor is another one that you'd see him in Avengers here and there, but nobody really cared about Thor that much, at least that, from what I remember. And now they're making these blockbusters where it's like, oh, everybody's going to see the new Thor movie, or everybody wants to see Iron Man. And I think part of that is you get an actor like Robert Downey Jr. to play that part, where I think Robert Downey Jr. felt like this was his last chance at a big payday as an actor. So he really went with it as well. But it was almost like a perfect storm for them in 2009, where they got this Iron Man movie to work, and suddenly now Iron Man is considered like one of the biggest of the characters. And they just kind of took it from there. Like, then everybody was like, okay, well, now if you're using Iron Man, we want to see the next ones. And the other thing, too, I think that they did that was really well, when you talked about the books, crossing over, when we were growing up, it seemed like you would get guest stars. People would be in, would work together and be in each other's books. And that was, I think, something that whoever, I guess they must have, they got people on board when Disney took over Marvel. They got people on board that read comics and liked them and knew what would work for us, and started incorporating some of those elements, and suddenly the whole thing took off. But one of the things I think is fascinating about the way the Marvel success has been is that they are beyond the comic books now. It's like they're more, people that didn't read the comics like the movies and watch the movies and are huge, fans of the movies, which I think is a real interesting. It's something that I would have ever seen, 20 years ago when I was reading comics, or I guess, well, I'm saying 20 years ago. It's actually more like 30 years ago now, but same idea.
Yeah, it's kind of like Game of Thrones in that sense, where it's become its own entity that, grew from one thing and became its own phenomenon.
Yeah. Now, one thing I wanted to touch on is the DC ones. We touched on it a little bit. But I saw the Green Lantern movie recently, because I know that was one that's been panned as being, a really bad one. And it fascinated me when I was watching that one, because DC has really great properties that should be, big deals. And Green Lantern was one that I was, growing up, I didn't always read that comic, but I always thought he was a really cool character. And one of the things I think when I was watching that movie I recognized was that it took like 45 minutes for him to even get the Green Lantern ring, and be Green Lantern. So I can see how it was, sort of sautéed in wrong sauce. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on the DC movies and sort of the way that they've used their characters to obviously they're falling behind Marvel with some of these. They're not getting the big, but maybe now starting to catch up a bit.
I mean, to me, warts and all, I kind of really enjoy the DC movies. I think Man of Steel was a really good way to bring Superman into the 21st century. And I think that Batman versus Superman is, we were talking about directors who put their stamps on their movies. Well, I won't get into the Snyder Cut situation with Justice League, but you watch a Zack Snyder movie, you're watching a Zack Snyder movie.
Yeah.
And they're his movies. They might not be your Superman movies. They might not be, the comic book guy on the Simpsons Superman movies, but it's a Zack Snyder movie. And until Justice League came around, there wasn't no compromise.
Yeah.
And I like that. It's almost like an art film. Whatever Batman movie have you seen where he has like a World War II dream sequence with flying devil angels like descending upon him? So, and even like Aquaman is just so weird. Where else are you going to see Dolph Lundgren riding around on a seahorse? Yeah. And I think now they're getting their due because of Joker, because it's R-rated. But for the first 2 years that movie was in production or whatever, that people were saying it won't work.
Yeah.
And they made so many missteps. It's like, well, why won't it work? But even Suicide Squad was, tampered with in, post-production and stuff. It has these moments where you're like, it's just, you're not going to get that from a Marvel movie. And it's maybe because DC doesn't have their shit together, but I kind of like that. I like the odd parts that don't really fit.
Yeah, it's funny because, one of the things right now, Disney has such a big share of the market, and I'd read somewhere that Disney's looking to take over maybe 60% of theaters, or 60% of theater space. So, from Time Warner's standpoint with a DC movie, I read recently they said they didn't know what to do with Superman. They didn't know how to make Superman relatable to modern audiences, and I took that as not meaning make it relatable to audiences, but not make it relatable in a way that it will pull in $4 billion. And I don't know if DC can pull in $4 billion anymore because, they put out their blockbuster in the summer, and Disney can put out a Marvel movie, a Star Wars movie, a Pixar movie, a cheap romantic comedy, and just flood the theater and take as many screens as possible, so that if they make a Superman that could pull in $4 billion, it's hard to get enough screens to even be able to get enough people in the theater to see it, because Disney can really flood the market. And so I wonder if that's where Time Warner needs to look at it, and maybe even Sony as well. And I think maybe Sony is doing that already with their Spider-Man products, but maybe that's where they need to look at it and say, we got to do something like the Joker. We've got to do, if we're going to do Superman, let's do something different with it that maybe doesn't pull in $4 billion, but maybe pulls in the kind of money that down the road it's going to pay dividends and get people back on track. And, because Superman, I think of, 2 successful TV shows, the successful movies in the 70s, and like you talked about, the Man of Steel, it's a product that can work. But if you're thinking in terms of we need to beat Avengers Endgame, then yeah, maybe it's hard to figure out, because when I think of Superman, I actually think Superman would be the villain in an Avengers movie, right? I mean, he's got the strength of the Hulk, he's faster than whoever else, he can fly, he's got X-ray vision, he's indestructible. He would be the villain that they would fight in the Avengers, and they'd have to figure out how they can suddenly like Iron Man's creating like kryptonite guns or something like that to stop him at the end of the movie.
Well, they actually did that in the Justice League movie, and I thought that was brilliant. I was like, okay, I'm here for this. I like that, whether or not it seemed like people were really soured on it, and I can see why, because it's a hodgepodge thing, but like you get those crystal moments, that are just like, all right, like to me, I would rather swing for the fences and get thrown out going home than have a safety squeeze single, like what it seems like a lot of the Marvel movies are. And it's very safe, where DC, when they miss ugly, but they're swinging.
Yeah, I agree with you there, because that's the one thing about the Marvel movies, and I think that's when Scorsese made his comments about the Marvel movies. I think part of it was the fact that those are the only movies that are really getting made by the big movie houses now, but also the idea that they're so focus grouped that maybe with Endgame, maybe you didn't know who was going to be killed off at the end, and be like, and we don't even know if they're permanently killed, right? Because that's kind of the thing with Marvel, right? It's kind of the nerd approach, right? Nobody ever really dies in a Marvel movie, and I would not be surprised, spoiler alert, if you don't know that Iron Man gets killed at the end. I would not be surprised if Gwyneth Paltrow was pretending that he was dead, and they faked his death so he could just live a peaceful life, and that in 5 years, when Robert Downey Jr., whatever he's been doing, hasn't been working out for him, and he needs a payday, and suddenly what's his face, Samuel L. Jackson gets on his phone and calls him up and goes and finds him on that lake house there and brings him back into action. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a fake death and they bring him back. So, that kind of thing, you see that. But beyond that, you kind of know what's going to happen in a Marvel movie, right? You know that it's going to start off with the characters maybe winning some kind of situation, and then the baddie emerges. They confront the baddie, lose, figure out how they can come back, all those kind of peril, sort of that thing at the end where everything's in the balance and can they possibly win. And yeah, I agree with you. With the DC ones, you sometimes just don't know what they're going to do with them. And I mean, I think the way they brought Batman into the series was great, because Batman has always been, I think ever since the Tim Burton movies in '89, when they blew up and were so successful, DC has always kept Batman separate from the rest of them. Bringing Batman in, I think, was a really good move on their part, because that's what we all want to see. We all want to see Batman with everybody else, and it'll be cool. I think they're bringing Green Lantern back in as well. So suddenly, these great DC products, if they can bring them all in, and unlike Marvel, where Marvel has to, Marvel doesn't always have everybody, that they've got to try to get them from other places. Warner knows they've got all the DC guys, so they can use whoever they want.
I think the genius of Batman versus Superman was taking a Batman who we haven't really seen before. He's not quite the Dark Knight of the Frank Miller comics yet, but he could be. He's one bad day from being that guy. He doesn't break his rule of not killing, but he comes pretty close to branding people, and he's just very disillusioned. And the whole, I was really jazzed by Ben Affleck's performance, and then when Superman dies at the end, I mean, he's my Batman. He's the Batman that will fight for his friends, and so it was a different arc than what we've seen. I really appreciate them taking some chances with their characters.
Yeah, especially one like Batman that is such a cash cow for them that you wouldn't see Marvel doing the same chances with Iron Man, with any other characters. They wouldn't take a chance like that because they wouldn't want to risk. They'll take the chance with somebody like Daredevil that had a bad initial film. Speaking of Ben Affleck, unfortunately, but a movie that didn't really succeed as well, and then do something kind of try him out in a Netflix series. But yeah, they're not going to take chances with their big ones that same way. I think that was refreshing for me, especially the way Batman had been treated with the Christopher Nolan movies, where they were those kind of blockbusters that everybody wanted to see. And I think part of that, I don't think that was so much Christopher Nolan. I think that was that Heath Ledger performance as the Joker in the second film, where it just sort of bolstered and everybody just wanted to see what was coming next with those. But I think the fact that DC recognized that and said, no, okay, those movies have a shelf life, those Christopher Nolan ones, that we kind of got lucky that Heath Ledger came in and turned in the performance that he did to make those as compelling as they were. Let's see what we can do now, bringing him in with the rest of our universe and kind of do what Marvel's doing with all of their characters.
And I think the Nolan movies were an important step, too, of legitimizing Batman again.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people still had Batman and Robin on the brain, and they needed kind of a resetting of what Batman could be. And I think, seeing kind of like the year one aspect in Batman Begins was a great way to kind of just reset the table and say, okay, this is Batman for the 21st century. And like you said, and then it was successful. It wasn't, the Dark Knight level of success, but like you said, Heath Ledger comes out, knocks it out of the park, and now all of a sudden everybody's excited about Batman again.
Yeah. And, one thing, too, that I was thinking about with DC is that they did a really great job with their TV shows. I mean, I didn't really watch a lot of them, but, with the Arrow series, like taking a character like Arrow, I think that's kind of what Marvel was hoping to do, but making it more R-rated. But I think they wanted to do with Daredevil and those characters, do kind of, mimic the success that DC had with Arrow and then with Flash and the spin-offs from that. I thought they did a really good job, knowing that they were, kind of a bit behind Marvel when it came to the blockbusters, to take some of those characters. I mean, I couldn't imagine an Arrow movie. I couldn't, Green Arrow as like kind of, heading the film. But, taking a chance on the CW to see, if that audience there would take to that. And now they've got all of these shows. And it feels like that almost sort of brought them forward with the Justice League characters, that they saw that they had some success with the smaller ones, so now we can bring the bigger ones in and see. Like, I mean, I wouldn't have expected Aquaman to be a successful film if you had told me 10 years ago that they were going to make an Aquaman movie. But that's where DC is sort of at that place now where they can make that successful movie. Obviously, if they're looking for Endgame, that's probably not where you're going to go with Aquaman. But, I'm going to be curious to see with Marvel, to see how successful, like, the Black Widow movie is going to be. I mean, it's, she's not a character that I would think of that would carry a movie as well, but I would have thought the same thing about Thor. So I guess, you never know.
Well, and also, like, I think what DC does really, really well, they bring in filmmakers.
Yeah.
They don't bring shooters.
Yeah.
Aquaman works because it's a James Wan movie. It's I mean, that whole sequence in the trench is, just a really great mini horror movie in itself, and that's all James Wan.
Yeah.
So you have Todd Phillips, who I wouldn't really have called a filmmaker until I saw Joker, and I don't think it's as great as everybody says, but it works. When most of it is due to Joaquin Phoenix's performance, but it almost sounds like a setup for a Simpsons gag, like, we're going to do Taxi Driver, but with the Joker.
Right.
But they commit to it, and it works. And like I said, they're taking chances. And going back to the small screen, my favorite DC small screen is the Teen Titans Go.
Yeah.
They do satire of the whole, Marvel, DC universe, even, pop culture the last 30 years better than many shows. And it even has, like, very off the wall, like, Ren and Stimpy kind of humor to it. And, I know a lot of people don't like it because it knowingly trashes the old Teen Titans Go show.
Right.
But that's the fun of it. Especially the Teen Titans Go movie, they got Nicolas Cage as Superman.
Yeah.
That right there, that tells you everything. They do the satire the right way.
Yeah.
And they know their history. And Nicolas Cage played Superman and Spider-Man, albeit, in a animated form, but in the same year. So to me, I think Teen Titans Go is the epitome of kind of satire when it comes to superhero movies.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring that up, because I think, maybe that's like, I think, when I saw that article about DC saying that they don't know how to make Superman viable to modern audiences, it feels like with all of the things that they made where they were like, we're not going to try to make this viable, like the Joker, taking a chance, Teen Titans Go, where it's like, we're just going to make this the way we want to make it. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, maybe that's where they need to go with Superman. Maybe they need to I don't know, say tear it all down and start all over, but maybe they need to look at it and say, let's throw the rules out, and let's say, we know Superman's a certain character. Either, they do something different with it, or you just say, you know what, let's just, let's do something, like, I guess let's not try to make Avengers. Let's not try to make something that's going to make $4 billion. Let's just make a movie first. And then if it's successful, that's great. Let's I think if what we were talking about, where you get filmmakers in and you have them make movies, sometimes that's all you need. Yes, sometimes you end up, I haven't seen The Irishman yet, so maybe I shouldn't say this as an example, but sometimes you get something like that. So obviously you want to rein the filmmaker in a little bit, not have them make a 3.5-hour epic on Superman. But I think, instead of trying to find something that's going to appeal to the most people, get the most kids buying birthday sets for having Superman themed birthdays and all of that, just make a movie about Superman. Because I think, like we talked about with Zack Snyder with the Man of Steel, that, sometimes that's all it takes. It's just having a filmmaker with a vision trying something out and seeing if it works or not. It doesn't always work, but if instead of the mindset being, we need to break records, we need to be, we need to be the next biggest one ever, we need to be the one that all of the local news stations are talking about as the top grossing film for that weekend. If instead of that, if they're saying, let's make a movie and see how it goes, let's make the Joker and do something with the Joker, like you said, making Taxi Driver, but having it be the Joker, none of us would have necessarily, I mean, it seems like a great idea, but I don't, we would have thought that, but nobody's looking at the Joker and saying like, all right, we need the Joker to make $4 billion. They're thinking like, this is an idea we have for the Joker that we want to try and see how it goes. And I think it ends up being one of the most, I think it made a lot of critics' top 10 lists this year. So in that sense, I think it was successful. Did it make $4 billion? I don't think, no, but does it have to?
I think it is. I think pound for pound, dollar to dollar, it is the most successful one. I think it made $1 billion, but it only cost $60 million to make, whereas Endgame cost $350 million. So you have this thing, it's like you can spend less money, make it quirky and arty, and do it on a budget, and if it makes money, it's going to make a lot of money for you. If not, what's $60 million, that might be the catering budget on Endgame.
Right. No, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, that's the idea. And yeah, I mean, that movie is just, it is, low budget. I mean, there's not a lot of CGI. There's not that kind of stuff going on in it. I mean, when I think of Endgame, yeah, I mean, Endgame, spent a lot of money on it, but, ultimately, like for me, Thanos looks like a cross between Grimace and Ned Beatty. And so, like I'm watching this and I'm like, that's Ned Beatty on the screen, like kind of an inflated Ned Beatty. And I mean, I remember Ned Beatty on the Rockford Files. He was very menacing as a baddie on the Rockford Files, giving Jim Rockford a hard time. But, if we're going to spend $300 million, I want Thanos to look badass. I don't need him to look like Ned Beatty so much for me. And I think sometimes, even with all that money, it's like you sometimes lose the forest for the trees there, where it's like, okay, now we're doing the Joker. We've got Joaquin Phoenix, who, he looks like, I mean, I don't know, your classic like early '90s record store guy with the long hair and everything, but then like painted up so that like, he's got the Joker face and everything, and they're borrowing from like the king of comedy from Taxi Driver and things like that. And you're watching, you're like, this is something that I wouldn't have thought with the Joker. I don't know if I would have done this with the Joker, but it's working for me. That's, I think, is a different place than. I liked Endgame. I don't want to knock it completely because I think, I liked Endgame. But for the amount of money they paid it, actually, I don't know necessarily how much I like the end of Endgame, where it's like the big fight and everything. The contrived thing about going back in time was a little bit much for me. But for me, as someone who watched read the books, I mean, I would have liked to have seen the Silver Surfer in there with Thanos. And I know they didn't own the rights to the Silver Surfer, but that, he's, it's kind of hard to have that without that. Star-Lord is a character that really annoys me. I don't, I have trouble watching him for a long period of time. So yeah, if I'm going to watch something with Joaquin Phoenix playing the Joker, where I'm kind of being made to feel uncomfortable at times, that it's borrowing from things that I recognize and I know. There's no Scorsese obviously in any of the Marvel movies. You're not seeing anything like that. I mean, it would be kind of cool to see Thanos like acting like Joe Pesci's character in Goodfellas and like stomping people and stomping out. Maybe they could get a computerized Frank Vincent to stomp out or something. But I know what you mean there. Like, I think the Marvel movies are safe and they do the trick. You can watch them and have a fun time, but is it the same as like with these DC ones where you're like, man, that's something that I didn't see coming?
Yeah, I mean, they have a very assembly line, homogenized. It's a product, but it's a product that we eat up, and it works. And I'm not putting them down for making a product, because Disney's in business to make products, but they're very cookie cutter, and occasionally like I think, and you also have to pair the actor with the role too, like you were saying with Iron Man, and like Paul Rudd as Ant-Man. Yeah. I mean, I think Ant-Man would be just kind of a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids kind of thing, but you have Paul Rudd there who kind of gives it its charm, and you're like, very, like Tony Stark has it all figured out. Captain America has it all figured out. Ant-Man doesn't have it figured out. He's just flying by the seat of his pants. And, you need, if you're not going to take risk with the characters, at least take risk with the casting. And so, like, for me, I think that the Ant-Man ones are ones I revisit. And plus they put guys like Walton Goggins as, just minor characters. You see Walton Goggins in the movie, so well, I'm definitely watching this. So, it all goes back to Disney just playing it safe. But if safe makes them $4 billion, that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe from DC's standpoint, like maybe DC looks at it now. Maybe that's the ultimate reality that they have to face, is that it's going to be hard for them to make that kind of money because they just can't get enough screens in a theater now. With Disney being so big, I think it would be hard for them to do it. But with something like the Joker, maybe like the Joker, it kind of builds a little bit on itself, and then a theater takes away a screen. Maybe they say, you know what, this romantic comedy that Disney shoved on us here, that they made for $10 million just to take up a screen, so that Sony or Time Warner couldn't, Universal couldn't have a film there. Maybe they start saying, hey, you know what, people want to see this movie a lot more. We're going to take this movie out of here. We're going to get rid of this one. We don't need this romantic comedy in here because people want to see the Joker. And maybe that's part of it. Is that's what DC's got to go into it as, is like, this can't just be like the biggest thing right off the bat the way the Avengers was. It's got to be something maybe like the Joker that builds, and word of mouth goes through. People start saying they've seen it, they liked it, and next thing you know, like you said, it grosses $1 billion worldwide on a $60 million budget. I don't think Superman can be made for $60 million, but that idea.
Well, I mean, and then you had all the kind of controversy around it, where people were, saying, oh, people are going to turn into the Joker. People are going to, and I'm like, I didn't really understand where that was coming from, and I don't know if that might have been a marketing ploy all by itself, but it was a very strange time to like, just everyone is just saying, oh, this is bad. This is, we can't have this. Yeah. And then it comes out and there's no incidents whatsoever. And I'm not, trying to make light of, real life violence and stuff, but I was like, I don't see the Joker being the guy being like who goes in and shoots people.
Yeah.
The Joker seems like he would send in a present that had like poison gas or something in it.
Yeah.
So it was just like a very it was a very strange time leading up to the movie, and then I think now everybody's kind of forgotten about it.
Yeah, well, because it has, now we're at the end of the year and people are putting out their top 10 lists, and it is making those lists, and people are respecting it for what it was. I think even John Waters had it on his top 10 list for the year. So, and that kind of made me stand up, because I was like, I wasn't going to see it, and then that happened. I was like, okay, this is something to think about. And I think that's part of it, is if you make a good enough movie that someone like John Waters, I mean, he's not going to put into. I mean, you never know with John Waters. He could put an Avengers movie for his top 10, but. And now people are going to look for that Joker character, maybe if you bring him into these other movies, and do stuff with it. But even if it's just a standalone film, for what it was, I think DC did really well with that. I think, I almost feel like that Joker movie, was the kind of movie that might have been a direct-to-video movie when we were, in the 80s, and we would have been like, oh, that's the Joker, kind of the way, it was with like Captain America and things like that. But you'd be like, wow, this actually turned out really well. I mean, I don't think you could have made a Joker movie like this back then, because nobody would have greenlight something like that. But I wonder if maybe this, that article that I saw on Forbes about Superman, I wonder if their calculus has changed with how successful the Joker was.
Well, I think it's a pairing of actor with role. As soon as I heard Joaquin Phoenix as the Joker, I'm like, my ticket's already bought.
Right.
Because he's one of the more kind of just exciting actors to watch. I mean, even when the movie itself isn't so great, I mean, he just commits 100%. And to have him kind of in that role, it didn't matter if it's going to be a mashup of Scorsese movies or the director of Old School is at the helm. Right. I'm there for it.
Yeah.
So I think with Superman, they always try to. It seems like they cast an unknown. Mm-hmm. I really wish we had gotten that Tim Burton movie with Nicolas Cage's Superman, because, like you said, they're like, well, how do we make him relevant? No, you don't make him relevant. You cast the weirdest guy on the planet as Superman, and you go for it. And I really. I think that's one of the great what ifs of our time, is a Tim Burton, Nicolas Cage Superman movie.
Yeah, because you think about that second Ghost Rider movie, where it's almost like Cage Unleashed. And that one kind of felt like a direct-to-video movie as well, because it was made in Romania. It didn't have a lot of big names. It had Idris Elba, and then, of course, you get DTV names like Christopher Lambert. But seeing Cage Unleashed as both Johnny Blaze, and then, I don't know who was doing the Ghost Rider character, but, seeing him unleashed as Johnny Blaze, where he's just acting crazy in the film, you kind of think like, man, I mean, some of the things about Superman have got to be messing with your head. You're the lone survivor of a planet that's gone. You're living on this planet where you're the only person of your kind. You've got superhuman strength. You can't be, you can't be attacked. I mean, we don't know what it's like for him to be in a relationship with Lois Lane, but you got to think like he must be afraid he's going to crush her if he's hugging her and things like that. He's like super, I mean, there are a lot of things you could do with Superman where you could get someone like Nicolas Cage who, like, it could be like Superman goes crazy, or Superman dealing with depression or something like that, where it's like this like next level thing where you get into really like what Superman could be, we don't really think about what it would be like to be Superman, because you sort of take Superman for granted that he's just perfect and he's always good and all of that. I always thought the biggest thing, my favorite Superman movie was the second one, because I love the fact that you had other people from his planet, and of course I love Terrence Stamp anyway, but that idea that there were other people from his planet that had showed up. And there are things about being Superman that I think would be extremely stressful that nobody ever really talks about. It's always just like, oh, he's Clark Kent, and then he becomes Superman, and he flies around and saves the day, and then he goes back to working at the at the Daily Planet. Nicolas Cage is the guy that could tap into that. He is the guy that could tap into the essence of Superman. And yeah, okay, and I think you could do that kind of Superman without spending $300 million and still have it be compelling and being interesting, and maybe this crisis of self of Superman with Nicolas Cage at the helm. I would so pay to see that. Like, that's something that I would go out in the theater and see the moment it comes out, because that, like you said, that's like kind of the biggest what ifs. Like, what if we'd actually gotten to see Nicolas Cage as Superman?
And I mean, I mean, maybe this is too on the nose or anything, but I mean, Superman is the ultimate immigrant, right. And with everything going on in the country now, I mean, a crazy billionaire like Lex Luthor, like in charge of the White House, it would almost write itself. Do you want to do that on the nose, where make him a detainee, or
right?
I mean, if you want to make it relevant, there's your story. Yeah. And you just the right people behind it, if that's what you want to do, because I think all the ingredients are there to make it timely, to make it, ripped from the headlines. But do you do that, or do you do something like you said, like that's just off the wall and maybe will stand the test of time because it's just an out-of-the-box idea.
Yeah, and again, I think Nicolas Cage. I think Nicolas Cage could be interesting even in that other one you talk about. I mean, you think about it, like, yeah, you talk about, like, kids being detained. What if Superman and Lois Lane have a child, and Lex Luthor becomes the president, and he wants the child detained, and so you see this infant in a cage, or maybe slightly big, a toddler in a cage. You could make it something like that. I mean that's where Battlestar Galactica, when they remade that for sci-fi, they made their money just by being allegory for the Iraq War at that time. And that's something else that could be done. I think my feeling is with DC is that they want to go outside the box, but I think they would be afraid of, like, cutting off that 42% or whatever that would not find a movie like that agreeable. But I don't know. I mean, I think I really think that the Joker's success changes everything for DC now. I think they're going to start thinking outside the box more. I hope with Superman that's something that happens.
Well, they have James Gunn for Suicide Squad 2, who will bring his own brand of humor to the franchise. I don't know what the heck they're doing with Birds of Prey. It looks, off the wall, but more power to them for going all in on the weirdness. So I just look at that, shrug, say, well, all right, you got my ticket. I bought my ticket already. Entertain me.
Yeah, I want to see what they do next. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, they got the Wonder Woman coming out in the summer. So it's going to be. I mean, that's one that we were puzzled about for years. Why haven't they made Wonder Woman yet? Because that '70s show was very popular, and it felt like when they were going to create a woman, a action movie or a comic book movie helmed by a woman, Wonder Woman was the logical one. And the fact that it took so long for them to make Wonder Woman was really puzzling for people. But now that they've done it, it's like, okay, now they're going to keep building off of it. I think that's going to be a great thing to see what happens there. And I think that's where Marvel is starting to try to catch up now, because they saw how successful Wonder Woman. Now, we've got to do Captain Marvel. We've got to do, the Black Widow movie. And that's where I think Fox could have really been out and ahead of all of them, because they had, with the X characters, there were a lot of great female characters that could have helmed a movie like Storm. But, that's neither here nor there. But, DC, I think DC might have shied away from doing Wonder Woman because they did the Catwoman movie. But that wasn't because it was Catwoman. It was because the movie was bad.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was like they took everything that made Catwoman out of Catwoman.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe that's a good note to end this on. But one thing I wanted to talk about quickly before we wrap up is because Christmas is coming, and I know when we were talking about topics for this show, I had mentioned Christmas movies, and you have a really great favorite movie. So I don't know if you wanted to tell people about your favorite Christmas movie.
Well, I mean, every time Christmas comes around, there's the classics. There's Christmas Story, there's Gremlins, Die Hard, Lethal Weapon, Last Boy Scout, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, yeah, anything Shane Black's made, basically. Right. But once you've gone through all them and you've watched all the Silent Night, Deadly Night, and Christmas Evil and Black Christmas, well, where do you go? Well, you watch Elves from 1989. It's probably the damnedest Christmas movie I've ever seen. It tells the story of a woman named Kristen who accidentally unleashes the killer elf. And that's right, it's called Elves, but there's only one elf, and that's just a small taste of what makes it just amazing. But the elves, as we all know, were created by the Nazis as their perfect soldier, because they're small, they're easily hidden, they have magic powers. Yeah, it's And, the elf is fated to mate with the Christmas Virgin on Christmas Eve and give birth to the Antichrist. We all know this story, of course. But the only man that can stop this from happening, of course, is Dan Haggerty.
Right.
Grizzly Adams himself.
Right.
He's the chain-smoking former detective turned Santa Claus at the department store after... Well, he only gets the job after the elf stabs the other Santa in the crotch. So he becomes the girl's protector, and together they try to stop the elves from the elf, I should say, from creating the master race again. I mean, it's the only movie I've seen that rips off Dawn of the Dead in Chinatown. I mean, there's a scene, I kid you not, there is a scene where someone says, "When there's no more room in hell, the elf shall walk the earth." and I can't tell you why it rips off Chinatown, because that would be a big spoiler, but trust, you'll know when you see it.
Yeah, I have seen that one advertised. I've seen that one pop up a few times, and I don't know what has caused me to not watch it, but maybe it's because I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what Elves was. I didn't know that it contained all of this goodness like this. I mean, just Dan Haggerty alone as a department store Santa.
It makes it so great because he commits to it. I mean, I've never seen someone more genuine and heartfelt. It's a really terrific performance in a movie about a killer Nazi Christmas elf.
I have got to see that. That one sounds amazing. I've got to. I like I said, I've seen it around, and I just never took the time to watch it. But now that I know what it's about, I have got to check that out.
You have to have it on your site. You have to review it for Christmas. I demand it.
Yes, I need to make that one happen for sure. I'm going to see if I can dig it up somewhere, and yeah, that is just too amazing to not do. My favorite, outside of, like you said, the big ones like Die Hard and whatnot, it's one that I reviewed for my blog a while back called "Make the Yuletide Gay," and so it's essentially your classic romantic comedy, but with a gay couple who what happens is that the one guy in the couple, he goes home with his family who don't know that he's still in the closet. They don't know that he's gay. The other one's parents are, the mom's Gates McFadden. So Gates McFadden from Star Trek, Dr. Crusher. So he, I guess, gets ditched by them because they go on a cruise or something. So he's like, well, I'm going to go see my boyfriend for Christmas. And he shows up at the place, and then it's this whole kind of like, your classic like screwball comedy of them trying to hide the fact that they're a gay couple. The parents are these hilarious like caricatures of Midwestern, North, like Minnesota type or Wisconsin Midwesterners. So they have the accent, they say silly things. They're burnouts from burnout hippies, so they smoke weed a lot and stuff. And it was a really fun movie to see. Like, we're so used to these, like we were talking about, these Christmas movies where it's like, the woman goes back to her hometown and all that stuff. To see it done like this, I thought was a really great twist on it. And the tension was real because it was the main character trying to stay in the closet, not have his family know that he's gay. So it was like actual real tension as opposed to some kind of manufactured tension that you see a lot of times in these, where it's like, oh, they're going to make the greatest pumpkin pie recipe and it gets stolen or something like that. So that was one thing that I thought was really cool. But that one was kind of a fun movie. It was one that I appreciated. But to be honest, like, I don't think it really compares to Elves. Elves might be my new favorite after that. I might have to apologize to Gates McFadden about that. I might have a new favorite holiday movie.
I mean, it was one of those movies I just saw at the video store. Like, I guess I was a freshman in high school, and we rented it. Rented that and Black Magic Woman with Mark Hamill. Oh, yes. And we just laughed our asses off. And so the next year, 2 days before Christmas, we rented it again, and again, every year it became this yearly tradition. And finally, my brother just bought it for me from the video store. And he said that when he went up to buy it, they had looked in the computer and said, well, your account is the only one that's ever rented this, so here.
That's awesome. That's one of the great things about the old video stores, that you have situations like that happen.
Oh yeah, I mean, I worked in a video store for years, and I mean, it's funny now when I watch old horror movies from the 80s and 90s, and if there's a scene set in a video store, I'll freeze it and just look at the titles. Right. Yeah. Because I mean, it thumbnail pictures on a app are nothing compared to just shelves of video boxes.
Yeah. Ty and Brett at the Come Up With Reviews, I did a show with them where we were talking about video store memories, and yeah, there's something about like that. Yeah, you go to those boxes, those faded clamshells where the video store would cut up the box and put it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was always, and there was something about it where you'd see something like Elves would be the kind of movies that my friends and I would be like, oh, we got to get this and see what this is about. And then, of course, yeah, you just have so much fun with it. And I know Bad Taste was our movie like that, where
oh yeah,
we reserved it one time. And the people at the video store were like, are you kidding us? Like, you really think somebody else is going to rent this movie? We just thought it would be funny to call up and reserve it to make sure nobody else could get it. And they were just like, yeah, okay, you just come in. It's
Yeah, and it's that spirit, that movie night spirit that I try to bring into my reviews. I mean, we would go, and I mean, there's one video store we went to, and they had nothing past 1986. It was all 1986 and newer movies. And we were like, well, that's fine because there's weird stuff that we can find. Then one day, lo and behold, they had the whole Rudy Ray Moore collection. We're like, what is this? And we watched Dolomite and Human Tornado, Petey Wheatstraw, and it was like a whole new ballpark. I was like, oh my God, what are these movies?
Yeah.
And it was just fun. There was always that one video store that had the nice stuff, and then you go to the one kind of in the sketchy part of town, and they had everything. I remember walking into one video store, and the first box I saw is Faces of Death. I'm like, okay, I'm in the right place. Right. If that's the one that you see when you come into the door.
Yes. Right, that's not the one that's kind of hidden off in the corner, but yeah, when you come in and see it, then you're gonna find something good. I remember Faces of Death. That was like the big that was the one that like most video stores would have it tucked away somewhere. Like you would find it, but it would be like kind of buried in the horror section, in the lower corners that after all the Nightmare on Elm Streets and all of that. Where if you see it coming featured when you come in the door, there's something different going on there.
Oh yeah, and I mean. It's funny now because like the way I look back at the drive-in is kind of like the way this generation looks back at the video store. And I remember going to the drive-in, just not a whole lot.
Yeah.
But I really, cherish those memories. And then, video stores might have been something that, this generation went to maybe a handful of times, but didn't really appreciate it until they were gone. And I think that's great because a lot of people will collect the old boxes and, set them up on their shelves and kind of relive those moments of, just wall-to-wall video art. And it's funny because, I mean, art's, in the eye of the beholder, I guess. But those old clamshell boxes, like you said, I mean, that's art. When you look at like a Death Head Virgin video box, you're not going to see that anywhere else but on that video box. And it's just, it's a sight to behold. And like I said, the Photoshop DVDs that we have today just aren't the same.
No, because you think of it like when we think of Instagram now, people zip through, you kind of page through, and it's like something has to be really big to catch your eye when you're zipping through. And that's how the old box art was. It was like, I'm in the video store and I'm going through rows and rows of videos, and it's like, this has got to catch my eye and make me want to rent this. And so it was a big deal. Like, they put a premium on making it look good because they knew that might be the only way that they were going to get their money.
Exactly, and half the time it's a retitled movie from the 60s.
Right, exactly.
And they just put a girl like tied to a cross with a guy in a black robe standing by her, but then you get it and it's just like, oh, it's just a black and white 50s movie. But that was the fun though. That was like the you roll the dice. Sometimes you get a classic, and then sometimes you get a dud. But when you got a classic like Elves, you just held on to it and you made it a ritual thing.
Yes. Well, that's one thing I was saying with Tie and Bread is that, like, nowadays with the streaming thing, it's not the same kind of investment, right, as it is when you go to the video store, pick something out and bring it home. I was saying how I remembered I had a friend coming over the first time, and I knew he was a big sci-fi fan. So we rented Dune Warriors, speaking of Sirio H. Santiago. Nice. I think he directed Dune Warriors, and I was like, oh, he's a big sci-fi guy, so Dune, he'll like Dune. He's like, no, this isn't Dune. This is Dune Warriors. And so we watched it, and of course we got a big kick out of it. Whereas, like, if he had been at my house today and we're paging through, the streaming site, it's like, oh, Dune Warriors, you want to do? No, that's not Dune. Oh, okay, moving on. And we never would have seen that movie.
And I mean, there is something to be said for. I mean, Tubi has an amazing selection of old stuff, and Amazon Prime. I mean, I can fill up my queue just from the customers also watched, and I kind of wonder when the crest of the wave of this is going to be, because it can't be this good for that long.
Yeah.
And I know at some point, it seems like they will either the content just won't be there, because I really don't like how unceremoniously things will just disappear from my queue.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like I always put that one movie in that I always wanted to watch, and then I go to watch it and it's not there.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a minor inconvenience because there's just so much stuff out there. Even on YouTube, I mean, just search it on YouTube and it's right there. I mean, I even think Elves is on YouTube.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm able to check it out. I know I was trying to find the Nick Fury, the Hasselhoff Nick Fury, and there's actually a French dubbed version of it on YouTube. So, because I mean, I think that one, out of more than any of them, other than the Fantastic Four one, I think Marvel is trying to bury that Nick Fury. Like, they don't want anyone to know that there was a David Hasselhoff as Nick Fury. It's only Samuel L. Jackson, and that's all they want us to know.
Well, I mean, then again, I mean, there is something for, David Hasselhoff is his own cult unto himself. So
exactly.
The people that want to watch that will watch it.
Well, for sure. Yeah. So maybe that's a good note to end it on. Before we do wrap up, though, Mitch, how can people find you? Not only find your books and on social media and all of that.
My website is thevideovacuum.blogspot.com. You can probably also search for The Video Vacuum on Amazon. My books are available. You could just search my name, Mitch Lovell, and under books, and they'll come up. And then I'm also on Twitter, The Video Vacuum.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if you're into this, looking at your movie reviews, I always love that they just kind of get right to the point. Like, you just not a lot of fluff there, but you cover so many different types of movies that I just think it's for movie lovers, like it's just great to be able to look at a lot of different types and get a good sense, and don't always agree, but I think your reviews, I think I can always know where you're coming from, which I definitely appreciate.
Well, I appreciate those kind words, Matt.
Absolutely. Well, at this point, we'll wrap it up here. Thank you again, Mitch. This was a really great conversation. We went almost 2 hours on this, which I had a feeling this was a very expansive topic that we could really go in. But I really appreciate having you on here and having this conversation.
Oh, thanks, man. I had a blast.
All right, excellent. Thanks, everybody. And again, check me out. You've got Facebook, DTV Connoisseur on Facebook, Twitter, all of that stuff. Feel free to comment. Let us know what you think. And we'll see you soon. All right, bye, everybody.
We've all spent more time with family lately. It can feel like old times, but your mind is on the future too, and what you can do to shape it. At Sandy Spring Bank, we work with clients to help them grow and protect their money with wealth management, trust services, and insurance, so they can enjoy today and ultimately pass along their wealth. We believe real banking is a conversation. Let's talk about your dreams. Visit sandyspringbank.com/wealth. Wealth and insurance products are not FDIC insured, not guaranteed, and may lose value.